They thought they were doing what was best for me, sending me to a nursing home because I was no longer their priority. But little did they know, I would turn that heartbreak into $1 million business. This isn't just a story about abandonment. It's about resilience, reinvention, and finding purpose in the unlikeliest of places. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Because tomorrow, we have an inspiring tale waiting just for you. The phone rang late one chilly evening, breaking the quiet I had grown accustomed to in my modest living room. When I picked it up, the voice on the other end was unmistakably Karen's. My eldest daughter, always so practical, always the one who took charge. But tonight, her tone was cold, clipped, and distant, as if she was delivering a verdict rather than sharing conversation. "Dad, it's time we talked," she said, her voice stripped of warmth. "We've decided that it's best for you to move into a nursing home. It's safer, and we can't take care of you properly here." The words hit me like a sudden, sharp blow. Silence filled the space between us, thick and suffocating. I wanted to ask why, to plead for understanding, but my throat tightened, trapping the questions inside. "You're putting me in a nursing home?" I finally managed, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Dad. We can't do this anymore." "It's for your own good," Karen replied, her voice firm, unwavering. I sat back in my worn armchair, heart pounding and mind racing. How had it come to this? My own children, the ones I had raised with love and sacrifice, were now treating me like a burden to be set aside. The house that once echoed with laughter and footsteps now felt emptier than ever, and the thought of leaving it behind was unbearable. But more than that, the crushing weight of abandonment settled deep within me. As the conversation ended, I stared at the phone in my hand, the receiver feeling heavier than ever. My family's decision wasn't just a logistical choice. It was a rejection of everything I had been to them. A father, a provider, someone deserving respect and care in his twilight years. The betrayal stung sharper than any physical pain I had ever endured. That night, sleep evaded me. I lay awake, thoughts swirling in a storm of disbelief and sorrow. I replayed memories of birthdays, school recitals, and late-night talks with my children, moments that now seemed fragile and distant. I remembered the sacrifices I had made to provide them with opportunities one never had. And yet, here I was facing the cruel reality that I was no longer needed, no longer wanted in the life they had built. But amid the heartbreak, a flicker of something else began to kindle inside me. Not despair, but defiance. This was not how my story would end. I refused to let myself be discarded like an old piece of furniture, forgotten in a corner. I was still here, still breathing, still capable of fighting back against this unexpected fate. The days that followed were filled with a hollow quietness. Karen and my other children spoke in measured tones, as if discussing logistics rather than my future. They visited less frequently, their visits brief and awkward. I felt invisible, a shadow slipping through the cracks of my own family. Yet beneath this loneliness, a resolve took root. I began to reflect on my life, decades of hard work, late nights, and unyielding dedication. I had built a career from scratch, weathered storms, and overcome setbacks with grit and determination. Could I allow myself to be defined by this moment of rejection? No. I decided that I would reclaim my dignity and purpose. If my family had turned their backs on me, I would find a new path, one that would prove not just to them, but to myself, that I was still a man of value and strength. The thought of this fresh challenge sparked a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. I started small. I scoured the internet for information about nursing homes, senior care, and the realities of aging in a system that often seemed uncaring and impersonal. The more I learned, the more I understood the bleakness that awaited many in places like the one my children had chosen for me. The stories of neglect, loneliness, and loss of autonomy disturbed me deeply. This knowledge fueled my determination. I would not become another forgotten resident in a soulless institution. Instead, I resolved to transform this painful experience into an opportunity, not just for myself, but for others who face similar fates. If the system was broken, then perhaps I could be part of the solution. I spent hours jotting down ideas, sketching plans for a way to provide better care for seniors. A place where dignity was preserved, where compassion was at the core, and where people were treated as individuals rather than just patients. It was a bold vision, one that felt both daunting and exhilarating. Friends and acquaintances noticed the change in me. "You seem different," one said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "More determined." I nodded, though I didn't share the full extent of my plans. This was something I needed to pursue on my own terms, fueled by a personal mission that went beyond simple revenge or defiance. It was about reclaiming my identity and forging a new legacy. Every evening, I would sit by the window, watching the world outside, imagining the future I intended to build. I pictured a community where seniors could thrive, surrounded by kindness and respect, a stark contrast to the coldness I had come to know. The pain of rejection still lingered, but no longer consumed me. Instead, it propelled me forward. Karen called again one afternoon, her voice tinged with guilt this time. "Dad, are you okay? We just want what's best for you." I paused before answering, choosing my words carefully. "I'm fine, Karen. More than fine, actually. I'm working on something important. Something that matters." There was a pause on the line, then a reluctant, "Okay." I didn't expect understanding just yet, but I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing I was taking control of my destiny. That night, I cleared a corner of my cluttered living room to serve as a makeshift office. I pulled out my old notebooks and pens, determined to turn my ideas into a concrete plan. The loneliness that had once felt so crushing now seemed like a blank canvas waiting for new colors. I thought about the years I had spent building a life for my family, the lessons I had taught my children about perseverance and integrity. It was ironic, then, that I was now the one who needed to learn those lessons all over again. But I was ready. As the days passed, my vision grew clearer. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles and skepticism. But I also knew that I had something many lacked: a lifetime of experience, a deep well of resilience, and an unshakable resolve born from heartbreak. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would rise from the ashes of abandonment and create something meaningful. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive, ready to defy the expectations that had tried to confine me. And so, with a steady hand and a hopeful heart, I began to chart my course toward a future I would shape with my own will, proving that even in the darkest moments, a man can find the strength to rise again. The first night in the nursing home was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in spirit. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I settled into the narrow bed, the sterile white sheets feeling foreign against my skin. The murmur of distant conversations mixed with the occasional cough and shuffle of tired feet, creating a soundtrack of loneliness that wrapped around me like a shroud. I had resisted this move for as long as I could, clinging to the hope that my children would change their minds. But the once familiar walls of my home had grown too quiet, too empty. Now, surrounded by strangers and the scent of antiseptic, I faced the stark reality that my life had been reduced to this place. From my window, I watched the sun set behind a row of aging trees, their branches bare and brittle like the residents I now shared a room with. The facility was nothing like I had imagined or hoped for. The paint peeled from the walls, the furniture was scratched and worn, and the decor had the cheerfulness of a forgotten waiting room. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a holding cell. Over the next few days, I observed the routines that governed this place: a rigid schedule of meals, medication, and brief periods of activity. The staff moved briskly, their faces often tired or distracted, caught between the demands of their jobs and the needs of those they cared for. I saw how the residents shuffled through their days, many resigned to passivity, their eyes dull and distant. One afternoon, I struck up a conversation with a fellow resident, Mr. Jenkins, a widower with a sharp wit and a lifetime of stories. As we talked, I realized that beneath the surface of this institution were individuals with rich histories, dreams, and desires, people who deserved more than the indifferent treatment they often received. But the cracks in the system were evident. I overheard a nurse scold a resident for asking too many questions, and I witnessed how some were left waiting for assistance, their calls unanswered in time. It was clear that the facility was understaffed and overwhelmed, struggling to provide the level of care that dignity required. These observations stirred something deep within me. I had spent my life building and managing businesses, solving problems, and creating value. Now, I faced a problem that was personal, one that touched not just me, but countless others trapped in similar circumstances. The inadequacies of this place were not isolated. They reflected a broader failure in how society treats its elders. I began to reflect on my own career, the lessons I had learned about leadership, customer service, and innovation. I thought about the companies I had built from the ground up, the teams I had led, and the challenges I had overcome. If I could apply even a fraction of that experience to improving senior care, perhaps I could make a difference. In the quiet moments, I jotted down notes and ideas. What if there were nursing homes that felt less like institutions and more like communities? What if caregivers were trained not just in medical tasks, but in empathy and communication? What if technology could be harnessed to improve safety and quality of life without sacrificing the human touch? I realized that the senior care industry was ripe for disruption, burdened by outdated models and a lack of genuine innovation. There was a gap between what was needed and what was available, a gap I was determined to fill. As days turned into weeks, I immersed myself in research. I read reports and studies about elder care, analyzed market trends, and reached out to professionals in healthcare and social services. I attended seminars and webinars, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. The more I learned, the clearer my vision became. But knowledge alone was not enough. I needed to understand the emotional and social dimensions of aging, the fears and hopes of seniors and their families. I spoke with other residents and their relatives, listening to their stories of frustration, grief, and sometimes gratitude. Their voices added depth and urgency to my mission. One evening, as I walked through the dimly lit corridors after dinner, I paused outside a small common room where a group of residents gathered for a game of cards. Their laughter was faint but genuine, a reminder that even in difficult circumstances, human connection endured. I felt a pang of responsibility, not just to myself, but to all these people whose lives had been diminished by neglect and indifference. This growing awareness solidified my resolve. I would not accept the status quo. I would use my skills, experience, and newfound purpose to create a better way, a model of senior care that honored individuality, promoted dignity, and embraced innovation. Yet, I knew the path ahead would be challenging. The industry was complex, regulated, and often resistant to change. There would be financial hurdles, bureaucratic obstacles, and skepticism from those who doubted a man my age could reinvent himself and the system. But I was undeterred. If anything, the adversity fueled my determination. I began drafting a plan, outlining the core principles that would guide my venture. Personalized care, compassionate staff, community engagement, and the smart use of technology. I envisioned facilities designed with warmth and accessibility in mind, where seniors could feel safe, valued, and engaged. In moments of doubt, I reminded myself of the pain that had brought me here, the sense of abandonment and invisibility. That pain was a powerful motivator, a reminder that this mission was not just business, but a calling. At night, I often found myself staring at the ceiling, imagining the future. I pictured a network of care centers that set new standards, inspired by the very failures I had witnessed. I envisioned families relieved to find places where their loved ones were treated with respect and kindness, where aging was not a sentence, but a stage of life to be celebrated. One afternoon, a young nurse named Emily stopped by my room. She was one of the few staff members who seemed genuinely attentive and compassionate. We talked about the challenges she faced daily, the understaffing, the emotional toll, the desire to do more for residents, but feeling constrained by the system. Her honesty touched me deeply. It reminded me that change would require collaboration, not just leadership. I needed to build a team that shared my vision and passion, people willing to challenge conventions and put heart into their work. Leaving the nursing home each day, I returned to my small apartment with a renewed sense of purpose. The contrast between the two places was stark, but both were part of my journey. One was a symbol of the problem, the other, a canvas for the solution. I began reaching out to old friends and contact from my business days, tentatively sharing my ideas. Some were skeptical, others intrigued. Slowly, I started assembling a network of supporters, people who believed in the possibility of change and were willing to help. The transformation that had begun with a phone call from Karen was now gaining momentum within me. I was no longer a passive victim of circumstance, but an active agent of change. The nursing home, with all its flaws, had become a catalyst, a harsh but necessary wake-up call that propelled me toward a new purpose. As I lay awake one night, I thought about the journey ahead. There would be setbacks and sacrifices, moments of loneliness and frustration. But there would also be hope, connection, and the chance to leave a meaningful legacy. The fire that had been ignited by rejection now burned brighter, fueled by knowledge, empathy, and determination. I was ready to take the next step, to turn my vision into reality, and to prove that even in the face of abandonment, a man can find strength, purpose, and a way forward. The decision to start my own senior care venture was born from a mixture of frustration and determination. I knew the road ahead was uncertain, but the urgency I felt was undeniable. I couldn't wait for someone else to fix a broken system. I had to take matters into my own hands. With the modest savings I had managed to set aside over the years, I rented a small office space in a quiet neighborhood. It was nothing fancy, just a plain room with a desk, a few chairs, and a whiteboard covered in scribbled ideas and plans. But to me, it was a battlefield where I would begin the fight to reclaim dignity for the elderly. I started by reaching out to local seniors and their families, listening intently to their experiences and frustrations with existing care options. Their stories echoed the same themes I'd witnessed firsthand: neglect, lack of empathy, rigid routines, and a sense of invisibility. Each conversation steeled my resolve to do things differently. One of the first challenges was finding caregivers who shared my vision. I didn't want employees who merely saw this as a job. I wanted people who understood the value of compassion, patience, and respect. Through community centers and word of mouth, I found a handful of individuals, retired nurses, social workers, and even some younger people looking for meaningful work, who were eager to join the mission. Together, we crafted a care model centered on personalized attention. Unlike traditional nursing homes where residents were herded through schedules, we focused on individual needs and preferences. Mornings weren't dictated by a loudspeaker. Instead, caregivers learned each person's habits, likes, and stories. We encouraged residents to engage in activities that brought them joy, whether it was gardening, painting, or simply sharing a cup of tea with a companion. Word began to spread slowly. At first, it was just a few families who tentatively placed their loved ones in our care. But their gratitude and the noticeable improvements in their relatives became our strongest endorsements. Testimonials trickled in, stories of seniors who had regained smiles, who felt seen and heard after years of neglect. One memorable moment was when Mrs. Thompson, an 82-year-old widow, told me, "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living, not just waiting to die." Her words were a balm to my weary soul, proof that the effort was worth every sleepless night and every obstacle faced. The media caught wind of our small but impactful operation. A local newspaper ran a feature highlighting our approach, describing it as a breath of fresh air in an industry desperate for change. Suddenly, more families called, seeking alternatives to the impersonal care facilities they'd grown disillusioned with. Growth brought new challenges. Managing a larger number of residents required more staff, more resources, and a more structured system to maintain quality. I leaned heavily on my business experience, implementing training programs to ensure every caregiver upheld our values. We introduced feedback channels so residents and families could voice concerns and suggestions, fostering a sense of community and accountability. Yet, despite the progress, I encountered resistance. Established nursing homes saw us as a threat, dismissing our model as idealistic or unsustainable. Some critics questioned whether a small operation like ours could handle complex medical needs. I welcomed the skepticism. It only fueled my determination to prove them wrong. Financially, the venture was a tightrope walk. Balancing affordable care with fair wages for staff and necessary expenses required constant attention. There were times when I had to dip deeper into my savings or negotiate with suppliers to keep things afloat. But every challenge reinforced the importance of what we were building. One evening, after a long day filled with meetings and visits, I sat in the office alone, reviewing the latest reports. The numbers showed steady growth, and more importantly, satisfaction rates were climbing. I felt a surge of pride, not just in the business metrics, but in the lives we were touching. I thought back to the moment Karen told me I was being placed in a nursing home, to the loneliness and despair that had threatened to consume me. Now, I was creating a haven for others who might otherwise face the same fate. The transformation was profound, not only for the seniors we served, but for myself. But I knew this was just the beginning. To expand our impact, I needed to scale up to reach more families and communities. That meant navigating complex regulations, securing additional funding, and building partnerships with healthcare providers. The path ahead was steep, but I was ready. Late at night, I drafted proposals and business plans, reaching out to potential investors who might share my vision. I attended networking events and industry conferences, often the oldest person in the room, but never the least determined. Each connection forged was a step toward turning my dream into a sustainable reality. The turning point came when a local philanthropist, impressed by our early success, offered seed funding to open a dedicated facility, a place designed from the ground up to embody our principles. The idea of a home that truly felt like home, where seniors could live with dignity and joy, rekindled my passion. We found a modest building in a suburban neighborhood, surrounded by trees and parks. Renovations began immediately, with input from staff, residents, and architects who specialized in accessible design. Every detail mattered, from wide corridors for easy mobility to communal spaces that encouraged social interaction. As the facility took shape, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than a business. It was a mission to rewrite the narrative of aging, to challenge the complacency and neglect that had become the norm. The first residents moved in with cautious hope. Families expressed relief at finding a place where their loved ones were treated with respect and kindness. Caregivers embraced the opportunity to work in an environment that valued their efforts and nurtured their compassion. One day, as I walked through the sunlit garden with Mrs. Thompson and a few others, I noticed the sparkle in their eyes and the laughter that filled the air. In that moment, I understood the true meaning of success, not measured by profit or growth charts, but by the smiles and renewed spirits of those we served. Still, I remained vigilant. The journey was far from over. Each day brought new challenges: medical emergencies, staffing shortages, financial pressures, but also new victories. With every hurdle overcome, our model gained credibility and momentum. Looking back, the transformation from a discarded father to an entrepreneur with a purpose felt almost surreal. Yet, it was real, and it was happening. I was no longer a victim of circumstance, but a creator of change. The story was still unfolding, but one thing was certain. The pain of rejection had been transformed into a powerful drive to build something better. For myself, for others, and for a future where aging with dignity was not a privilege, but a right. The initial success of our small care facility was a beacon of hope, but I knew that to truly make an impact, we had to grow beyond these humble beginnings. The demand for compassionate, personalized senior care was expanding rapidly, and with it came the responsibility to scale thoughtfully without losing the heart of what made our approach unique. Securing investors was my next challenge. I approached seasoned professionals with a clear vision and a business plan honed through months of trial and error. Many were skeptical at first. Senior care was seen as a stagnant industry, plagued by bureaucracy and low margins. But as I laid out our proven model, the testimonials from families, and the palpable difference in resident satisfaction, I began to turn doubts into interest. It wasn't easy. Pitch after pitch, I faced questions about sustainability, scalability, and regulatory hurdles. Yet, each meeting refined my approach. I learned to speak the language of investors without compromising the core values that defined our mission. Eventually, a group of like-minded partners came on board, willing to invest not just money, but their trust and expertise. With funding secured, we expanded our footprint. We opened new facilities equipped with cutting-edge technology designed to enhance care without disrupting the human connection. Sensors monitored residents' health discreetly, alerting staff to potential issues before they became emergencies. Tablets allowed residents to video call family and participate in virtual social activities, bridging the isolation many faced. But technology was only a tool, not a replacement for genuine care. We invested heavily in staff training, developing programs that emphasized empathy, communication, and cultural sensitivity. Caregivers underwent rigorous certification processes, and we instituted mentorship programs pairing experienced staff with newcomers. Creating a culture of respect and continuous learning became a cornerstone of our growth. Hiring was a delicate balance. We needed passionate individuals who shared our vision, but also professionals skilled enough to handle complex medical needs. Recruiting from diverse backgrounds enriched our team, bringing fresh perspectives and ideas. We encouraged staff to take ownership of their roles, fostering an environment where innovation and initiative were rewarded. To maintain quality as we grew, we implemented comprehensive feedback systems. Residents and their families could easily share their experiences, concerns, and suggestions through digital platforms and regular meetings. This transparency helped us identify issues early and adapt swiftly. Navigating regulations was a constant challenge. Healthcare compliance, licensing requirements, and funding programs created a maze of paperwork and inspections. I spent countless hours consulting with legal experts and healthcare administrators to ensure we met every standard without sacrificing our values. It was tedious but necessary work. Despite these hurdles, the company grew steadily. We became a recognized name in senior care, known for blending technology with warmth, efficiency with empathy. Media coverage followed, highlighting our innovative approach and the positive changes we brought to communities. Yet, growth brought its own stresses. As CEO, I juggled operational demands, strategic planning, and the emotional weight of our mission. There were days when setbacks threatened to overwhelm me. A staff shortage during flu season, budget constraints limiting expansions, or a family's disappointment with a loved one's progress. In those moments, I reminded myself why I started this journey. The faces of residents like Mrs. Thompson, who found joy in our care, fueled my determination. I leaned on my leadership team, empowering them to share the load and bring fresh energy to problem solving. We also expanded services beyond residential care. In-home care programs allowed seniors to remain in their homes longer, receiving personalized support ranging from medical assistance to companionship. Mobile health units visited neighborhoods, providing screenings and wellness checks. These initiatives extended our reach and reinforced our commitment to holistic care. Community engagement became a priority. We partnered with local organizations, churches, and schools to create intergenerational programs. Children visited to share stories and performances. Volunteers helped with gardening and events, and educational workshops raised awareness about aging and caregiving. These connections enriched residents' lives and fostered a sense of belonging. Financially, the enterprise moved from fragile beginnings to a sustainable operation. We balanced affordability with quality by optimizing processes and leveraging technology without cutting corners. Investors saw steady returns, but more importantly, they witnessed the social impact we achieved. Still, I remained vigilant against complacency. The senior care industry was evolving, with new challenges such as workforce shortages and policy changes on the horizon. I committed to continuous innovation, encouraging our teams to pilot new methods and technologies. One evening, after a long board meeting, I sat alone in my office reflecting on how far we had come. From that small rented room where I first sketched ideas to a growing enterprise touching thousands of lives, the journey had been extraordinary. Yet it was the daily moments, the smile of a resident reunited with family via video call, the gentle words of a caregiver easing anxiety, that reminded me of our true purpose. I thought about Karen and the family I had once feared had abandoned me. Our paths were different now, and while reconciliation remained uncertain, I no longer needed their approval to validate my worth. I was building something meaningful on my own terms. As the company continued to grow, I remained grounded in the principles that sparked this venture: dignity, compassion, and innovation. Each expansion, each new service was a step toward reshaping how society views aging and elder care. The road ahead promised new obstacles, but I was ready. With a dedicated team, a clear vision, and the lessons of past hardships, I embraced the challenge of leading an enterprise that was more than a business. It was a movement toward a better future for seniors everywhere. Years later, standing at the grand opening of our newest senior care facility, a sprawling, sunlit campus designed to be a sanctuary for aging with dignity, I felt a surge of emotions I hadn't expected. The crowd gathered around me included residents, families, staff, investors, and community leaders, all celebrating what had grown from a spark of defiance into a thriving enterprise. Among the guests, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, some who had journeyed with me from the beginning, others newly inspired by our mission. The media buzzed with cameras and microphones, eager to capture the story of a man who had transformed personal pain into a force for good. Yet, beneath the applause and accolades, I felt a quiet reflection stirring within me. I thought back to the phone call that had changed everything. The night my eldest daughter told me I was being placed in a nursing home, a decision that had shattered my sense of family and belonging. That moment of rejection had fueled a fire that led me here, but it also left scars that never fully healed. The irony was not lost on me. The children who had once turned away now stood among the crowd, some offering tentative congratulations, others avoiding my gaze altogether. I chose not to dwell on bitterness. Instead, I focused on the hundreds of seniors whose lives our company had touched, people who had regained smiles, independence, and hope. Their stories were the true measure of success. The woman who learned to paint again after years of silence, the man reunited with his grandchildren thanks to our technology, the staff member who found a calling in caregiving. All of them were part of this shared triumph. As I addressed the crowd, my voice steady but filled with emotion, I spoke not only of our achievements, but of the ongoing responsibility we bore. This is more than a business, I said. It's a commitment to honor the lives and stories of those who have built our world. We owe them compassion, respect, and innovation. After the ceremony, I walked through the halls of the new facility, watching residents engage in activities, caregivers offering gentle support, and families sharing moments of connection. The atmosphere was warm and vibrant, a stark contrast to the cold institution that had once been my reality. Yet, I knew the work was far from over. The aging population was growing, and with it, the need for better models of care. Challenges like staffing shortages, funding constraints, and evolving healthcare demands required vigilance and adaptability. But I was confident that with the foundation we had built and the community we had fostered, we could face whatever came next. Later, in a quiet moment alone, I reflected on the journey from abandonment to advocacy. The pain of being cast aside by my family had been deep and raw, but it had also awakened a purpose I might never have discovered otherwise. I had transformed rejection into resilience, despair into determination. I thought about Karen and the others, not with anger, but with a bittersweet understanding. Sometimes, family is complicated, and love can be tangled with hurt. I had chosen a different path, one that led me to create a legacy beyond blood ties. As I looked ahead, I felt a sense of peace. My story was no longer defined by loss, but by the lives I had touched and the hope I had kindled. I had become not just a survivor of rejection, but a leader in a movement that honored the dignity of aging. The applause from earlier still echoed faintly in my ears, but what resonated most was the quiet gratitude of those who called our facilities home. Their smiles, their stories, their renewed spirits were the true triumph, a testament to the power of compassion and the strength of the human spirit. In that moment, I knew that despite the pain I had endured, I had found purpose, fulfillment, and a way to make a difference that would endure far beyond myself. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.